Welcome back everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Daniel Cross was 38 years old when his wife of 10 years poured a $520 bottle of Chateau Latour down the front of his department store Blazer at the Four Seasons Hotel in Manhattan. The wine, a 2010 vintage that sommeliers called liquid velvet, soaked through the cheap cotton blend of his $140 jacket, darkening the fabric from beige to burgundy in spreading blotches. It dripped onto the polished white marble floor of the Diamond Ballroom, each drop echoing in the sudden silence that had fallen over the room. And the 180 investment bankers, private equity executives, and corporate attorneys watching had absolutely no idea they were witnessing the beginning of the most catastrophic miscalculation of her career. He stood there motionless, arms slightly away from his body, feeling the cold liquid seep through to his shirt, then to his skin. The wine pooled in the fabric folds of his slacks, another department store purchase, probably $60 from the clearance rack. His $45 Fossil watch caught a drop on its scratched crystal face. His Kohl's dress shirt, which he'd ironed that morning with careful attention to the collar, clung to his chest where the wine had splashed upward. Around him, 180 of the most powerful people in American finance shifted in their seats. Some cleared their throats uncomfortably. Others exchanged glances, the kind of looks that said, "Did that just happen?" A few of the younger associates, fresh out of Wharton and Harvard Business School, barely suppressed smirks. This was the kind of corporate dysfunction you heard about but rarely witnessed firsthand. And at the center of it all stood Vanessa Cross, née Vanessa Mitchell, dressed in a custom Chanel suit worth $9,200. The jacket was cut to perfection, accentuating her shoulders in that way that communicated power without aggression. The pencil skirt fell exactly to her knees, professional, authoritative, expensive. Her Louboutin heels added 3 inches to her 5'7" frame, and they'd cost $1,400. Her hair was pulled back in a flawless chignon that had required a 7 a.m. appointment with a stylist who charged $350 for the privilege. She looked every inch the executive she'd fought to become. And she was laughing, not loudly, not crudely. It was the kind of laughter you hear at charity galas when someone tells an inside joke about market volatility or regulatory arbitrage. Sophisticated, dismissive, the laughter of someone who belongs in rooms like this, surrounded by people who measure success in millions and billions, not thousands. Standing beside her, sharing in the private joke, was Marcus Webb, 53 years old, silver-haired, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from having $5.7 billion in assets under management. He was the founder and CEO of Apex Capital Group, the most aggressive private equity firm in Manhattan. He wore a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and a watch that cost more than most people's cars. Marcus Webb was powerful. Marcus Webb was respected. Marcus Webb was exactly the kind of person Vanessa had spent 5 years positioning herself to impress. And right now, Marcus Webb was watching Daniel Cross stand there covered in $520 wine, and he was smiling with polite amusement. "Jesus, Daniel, you're so awkward," Vanessa said, her voice carrying across the ballroom with crystal clarity. She didn't even look at him as she spoke. Her attention was fixed on the documents spread across the mahogany conference table. 3 separate stacks of papers, each one representing a piece of an $800 million transaction. "This is the most important moment of my career, and you can't even hold a glass without spilling it everywhere." She reached for a Mont Blanc pen, a gift from the Sterling Advisory Board when she'd made managing director, worth $800. The pen moved across the signature line with practiced elegance. "Why don't you go find a bathroom?" Vanessa continued, initialing a clause about equity conversion schedules without breaking stride. "The grown-ups need to finalize this transaction." The grown-ups. The laughter that rippled through the Diamond Ballroom wasn't explosive. It was worse than that. It was the knowing, insider laughter of people who understood the joke. The adults were here, the people who mattered, the people who moved markets and built empires and signed 9-figure deals. And then there was Daniel Cross, the awkward husband who couldn't even hold a wine glass properly at his wife's moment of triumph. Daniel recognized most of the faces in the crowd. 3rd row, left side. Gerald Brennan, senior partner at Kirkland & Ellis, the law firm that had structured the Sterling acquisition deal. Gerald had probably billed 800 hours to this transaction alone, at $1,650 per hour. Fourth row, center. Rebecca Cho, managing director at Goldman Sachs, who'd arranged the debt financing package that made the $800 million buyout possible. Back corner. The entire executive team from Sterling Advisory Group, Vanessa's company, or rather, her former company as of approximately 30 seconds ago when she'd signed the final page. They'd all watched Daniel fumble the wine glass that Vanessa had deliberately knocked from his hand. They'd all seen it, the way her elbow had swung out just as he'd been reaching for his water, the way the Chateau Latour had seemed to leap from the glass, arcing through the air in slow motion before splashing across his chest. They'd all seen it, and they'd all interpreted it the same way: clumsy, nervous Daniel, out of his depth at his wife's big moment. What they actually saw was a woman who'd knocked a glass from her husband's hand and then blamed him for the mess. But perception is reality in rooms like this, and the reality everyone perceived was that Daniel Cross was exactly what Vanessa always introduced him as. My husband, he's a freelance graphic designer, he does logos and website layouts. Very creative, but you know how artists are, not really the corporate type. The subtext was always there, humming beneath her words like a low-frequency vibration. He's not like us. He doesn't belong here. I've outgrown him, but I'm too kind to say it directly. Daniel looked down at his ruined blazer, at the wine still dripping onto the floor, and he felt that familiar burning in his chest. Not anger. Not anymore. He'd moved past anger about 14 months ago. This was something different, something colder and more purposeful. This was clarity. He looked up and caught Vanessa's eye for just a moment. She was already looking away, turning back to Marcus Webb, extending her hand for a congratulatory shake. The $800 million deal was done. Sterling Advisory Group, the consulting firm she joined 6 years ago as a junior associate, the company she'd climbed through with brutal efficiency, was now officially a subsidiary of Apex Capital Group. And Vanessa Mitchell Cross, age 36, was now officially a managing director at one of the most powerful private equity firms in the world. Her base salary, $740,000 annually. Her carried interest in the funds she'd manage, estimated at 2 to 3% of profits, which could mean another $2 - 5 million per year if her deals performed. Her equity stake from the Sterling buyout, converted to Apex shares, $3.1 million, vesting over 3 years. Her retention bonus for staying through the integration, $2.4 million, paid in installments. Her future equity grants at Apex, estimated at $6.2 million over 4 years, assuming performance targets. Total compensation package, approximately $11.7 million over the next 4 years, not counting her base salary. She'd earned it. Daniel could acknowledge that, even now, even standing here soaked in wine while 180 people tried not to stare. Vanessa had worked 90-hour weeks for 5 years straight. She'd missed birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. She'd taken red-eye flights to close deals in Singapore and London and Dubai. She'd sacrificed sleep, health, any semblance of work-life balance. She'd networked relentlessly, cultivated relationships with managing directors and C-suite executives, positioned herself as indispensable. She'd stepped on people, lots of people. Junior associates who'd made the mistake of trusting her with credit for their ideas. Competitors who'd underestimated how ruthlessly she'd pursue a deal. And Daniel. Most of all, Daniel. But she'd made it. She'd climbed from a $98,000 per year associate consultant to a managing director position that would make her one of the most powerful women in private equity. And standing there in his wine-soaked blazer from JCPenney, Daniel looked like exactly what she'd always told people he was. The dead weight she'd carried along the way. Of course, honey, Daniel said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the murmur of resumed conversations. People were already moving on, returning to their champagne and hors d'oeuvres, discussing deal structures and market opportunities. The wine incident was already becoming an anecdote they'd share later. Did you see Vanessa's husband spill wine all over himself? Poor guy looked completely lost. Daniel grabbed a cloth napkin from the nearest table, Egyptian cotton, monogrammed with the Four Seasons crest. He pressed it against his jacket, watching the burgundy stain spread across the white fabric. I'm sorry, he continued, still in that quiet voice that communicated apology and embarrassment and resignation. I'll wait in the lobby. Don't bother waiting, Vanessa said. She was accepting congratulations from Patricia Holloway now, one of her fellow Sterling executives. Patricia was pumping Vanessa's hand enthusiastically, grinning with genuine happiness for her colleague's success. This celebration dinner is going to run late. There's a car service, just take an Uber home. I'll be back whenever. Whenever. Not, I'll be home by midnight. Not, I'll text you when we're wrapping up. Just whenever, a word that communicated exactly how much thought she was giving to his existence right now. Daniel nodded. The perfect picture of a man who knew his place, who understood that he didn't belong in this world of private equity and nine-figure deals. He was the supportive spouse, the one who showed up when summoned, who smiled in photos, who made himself small so she could be big. He'd been playing that role for 4 years now. Ever since Vanessa's career had exploded and she'd started looking at him differently. Ever since she'd started introducing him with that apologetic tone. Ever since she'd begun measuring his worth in dollars and finding him lacking. He'd been playing the role so well that even he almost believed it sometimes. Almost. Daniel walked toward the ballroom exit, napkin still pressed against his chest, leaving a trail of wine drops on the marble floor. He could feel eyes on his back, some pitying, some amused, all dismissive. The unsuccessful husband, the one who hadn't kept pace. The starter husband she'd inevitably upgrade from once she realized she could do better. He pushed through the ornate double doors into the hotel corridor. The sounds of the celebration faded behind him, laughter, clinking glasses, the buzz of powerful people discussing powerful things. Daniel kept walking until he found a quiet alcove near the elevators. He pulled out his phone, an iPhone 11, 3 years old, with a cracked screen protector he'd never bothered replacing. He opened his messages and typed carefully, his thumbs moving across the screen with purpose. 2. Elena Rodriguez. Message. Initiate Phase 2. Apex acquisition of Sterling approved. Execute the Kellerman provision. Asterisk. Sent. 8:47 p.m. He stared at the message for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the send button. This was it. 18 months of planning. 18 months of enduring humiliation, of watching his wife transform into someone he didn't recognize, of preparing for this exact moment. 18 months since the night he'd come home early and overheard Vanessa on the phone with her divorce attorney, mapping out how to leave him the moment her Sterling equity vested, which was scheduled for 3 weeks after this acquisition closed. Daniel pressed send. The message delivered instantly. 3 dots appeared, indicating Elena was typing. The response came back within seconds. From Elena Rodriguez. Message. Confirmed. All provisions in place. Buyout agreement signed with Kellerman clause intact subsection 8.7b as drafted. Sterling legal team signed off without questions. Phase 2 activated. Standing by for Phase 3 on your signal. Asterisk. Received. 8:48 p.m. Daniel slipped his phone back into his pocket. He looked down at his wine-stained jacket one more time. He could still feel the dampness against his skin, cold and uncomfortable. In exactly 72 hours, Vanessa would attend her first official meeting as a managing director of Apex Capital Group. She'd walk into that boardroom confident, powerful, ready to prove herself to Marcus Webb and the rest of the executive team. And in exactly 72 hours, Daniel would be there too. Not as the embarrassing husband waiting in the lobby. Not as the freelance graphic designer who didn't understand corporate finance. Not as the deadweight she'd been planning to discard. He'd be there as himself. His real self. The self that Vanessa had been too busy climbing her corporate ladder to notice for the past 10 years. Daniel Cross, founding partner and majority shareholder of Apex Capital Group. The man who owned 62% of the $5.7 billion private equity firm that had just acquired his wife's company. The man who'd personally approved the $800 million deal she was celebrating right now. The man who'd spent 18 months designing a lesson about what happens when you underestimate people. But Vanessa didn't know any of that yet. Right now, she was in the Diamond Ballroom, accepting congratulations, drinking champagne that cost $300 per bottle, planning her brilliant future at Apex Capital. Right now, she thought she'd won. And Daniel was content to let her think that for exactly 72 more hours. He pressed the button for the elevator, watching the numbers light up as the car descended from the upper floors. When the doors opened, he stepped inside alone. The mirrors reflected his image back at him from 3 angles. A man in a wine-stained blazer, looking rumpled and out of place. The kind of man who gets left behind while his wife ascends to greater heights. Daniel smiled at his reflection. It was a cold smile. Not cruel, exactly. Just calculating. The elevator doors closed, and he descended. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they knew your worth? Have you ever watched someone you loved look at you and see nothing but what you lacked? If you've ever felt invisible to the people who should have seen you most clearly, then you're going to want to hear what happens next. Because what Vanessa doesn't know, what she's been too focused on her own ambition to notice, is that the man she just humiliated in front of 180 people isn't who she thinks he is. Not even close. And the company she just joined? The $800 million deal she just signed? It's all about to become very, very complicated, asterisk. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how we got here, to understand how a 38-year-old man could stand in a ballroom covered in wine while secretly owning the entire company, we need to go back. Back to before the humiliation. Back to before the marriage started crumbling. Back to when Daniel Cross was just a kid from Brooklyn with a gift for seeing patterns that other people missed. Back to the beginning. The story of how Daniel Cross became the silent majority shareholder of Apex Capital Group started 17 years earlier, in a cramped studio apartment in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, with a 21-year-old kid who'd just dropped out of Columbia Business School and a gift for predicting market movements that bordered on supernatural. Daniel had been young then. Young and hungry and absolutely certain that the traditional path to success, degrees, corporate ladder, playing by established rules, wasn't for him. He'd lasted exactly one semester at Columbia before realizing that everything they were teaching him was 3 years behind what was actually happening in the markets. While his professors droned on about efficient market hypothesis and modern portfolio theory, Daniel was sitting in the back of lecture halls with his laptop open, running custom algorithms he'd coded himself, watching patterns emerge in private equity deals that nobody else seemed to notice. He could see it. The way certain types of companies got acquired at premium valuations. The way specific market conditions created opportunities for leveraged buyouts. The way regulatory changes opened doors that remained invisible to traditional investors for 6 to 9 months. Just long enough for someone paying attention to position themselves perfectly. Daniel saw all of it. The patterns. The opportunities. The moments when a struggling company was exactly 18 months away from becoming acquisition gold. If only someone had the vision and capital to position correctly. He had the vision. He didn't have the capital. That's where Marcus Webb came in. They'd met at a private equity conference in Boston in February 2008. Daniel had been there on a guest pass, courtesy of a Columbia professor who'd recognized his talent even while failing to keep him in school. Marcus had been there as a featured speaker, 32 years old, fresh off a successful exit from his family's manufacturing business, sitting on $8 million in liquidity and looking for his next move. Marcus had given a keynote about disruption in traditional industries. It was polished, charismatic, full of the kind of business school rhetoric that conference attendees loved. After the talk, during the networking session, Daniel had approached him. "Your thesis about manufacturing disruption is 3 years outdated," Daniel had said, with the tactless honesty of someone who hadn't yet learned to soften his intelligence with diplomacy. "The real opportunity isn't in disrupting traditional manufacturing. It's in acquiring the companies that are about to get disrupted, restructuring them before the market realizes they're vulnerable, and flipping them to larger consolidators who are too slow to see the trend." Marcus had stared at him. Most people didn't walk up to keynote speakers and tell them their central thesis was wrong. "And you know this how?" Marcus had asked. "I built a predictive model," Daniel had said. "It analyzes private equity transactions across 17 different sectors, looking for pattern correlations between regulatory environment, market conditions, and acquisition premiums. I can predict which companies are going to become acquisition targets 6 to 9 months before traditional investors spot the opportunity." "That's impossible," Marcus had said. "I've been tracking it for 14 months, Daniel had replied. 73% accuracy rate on predicting acquisition targets. 81% accuracy on predicting premium ranges. Marcus had done what any smart person would do when confronted with someone claiming impossible results. He'd tested it. He'd spent 3 hours that evening in a hotel bar, throwing scenarios at Daniel, asking him to analyze specific companies and sectors, watching Daniel's mind work through the variables with a speed that seemed almost inhuman. By midnight, Marcus was convinced. By 2 a.m., they were sketching out a partnership on cocktail napkins. By March 2008, they had a formal agreement. The deal was simple. Marcus would provide the capital, $8 million to start, with access to another $12 million through his family's network of high-net-worth investors. Daniel would provide the intelligence, the analysis, the algorithms that could spot opportunities before anyone else saw them. They'd split the ownership 62-38, with Daniel holding the majority stake. Not 50-50, because Daniel's contribution, his mind, his systems, his gift for seeing patterns, was more valuable than Marcus's money. Money was replaceable, vision wasn't, but Daniel would remain silent. Unnamed in public filings, his ownership held through a series of limited partnerships and blind trusts that had taken 3 months and $140,000 in legal fees to structure properly. The SEC had signed off on it. Everything was legal, properly disclosed to regulators, fully compliant. Daniel would make every major investment decision. Marcus would be the public face, the charismatic CEO who took credit at conferences and charity galas and investor meetings. And both men were perfectly fine with that arrangement. They'd signed the partnership agreement on March 15, 2008, in the presence of a junior attorney named David Kellerman, who worked at a small firm in Midtown. David had been 29 years old then, brilliant but unproven, working 80-hour weeks for $95,000 a year while trying to make partner. David Kellerman had structured the Apex Capital partnership with such elegant precision that even the most aggressive corporate raiders couldn't find a weakness in it. He'd protected Daniel's anonymity while ensuring his control was absolute. He'd created a structure that would survive regulatory scrutiny, partner disputes, and any attempt by Marcus to edge Daniel out of power. The agreement was ironclad. The structure was bulletproof. And David Kellerman had been so good at his job that Daniel had made him Apex Capital's general counsel 2 years later, at a salary of $450,000 plus equity. David had died of pancreatic cancer in 2021, at age 42. He'd been Daniel's closest friend, the one person outside the partnership who knew everything about Apex's ownership structure, the one person Daniel trusted absolutely. Before David died, he'd introduced Daniel to his protégé, Elena Rodriguez, a first-generation Colombian-American who'd graduated top of her class from Yale Law and who had David's same gift for seeing 3 moves ahead in any legal chess match. Elena had taken over as Apex's general counsel. And when Daniel needed someone to help him design the most important plan of his life, the plan that would teach Vanessa Cross what it meant to underestimate people, Elena had been the only person he'd trusted to help him execute it. But that was much later. Back in 2008, Daniel and Marcus were just 2 young men with $8 million and a dream of building something extraordinary. And they did. Over 17 years, Apex Capital Group grew from a $8 million startup to a $5.7 billion private equity powerhouse. They did it by being smarter than everyone else. By seeing opportunities 6 months before traditional investors. By acquiring companies that looked troubled but were actually 6 quarters away from explosive growth. By restructuring, optimizing, and flipping to strategic acquirers at 3x 5x returns. Daniel made every major investment decision. Every single one. He built increasingly sophisticated algorithms, hired teams of analysts who fed data into his models, developed an investment thesis that was part mathematics and part intuition. Marcus executed Daniel's vision flawlessly. He was brilliant at raising capital, at schmoozing investors, at representing the firm at conferences. He could walk into a room of skeptical limited partners and walk out with $200 million in commitments. He could negotiate with CEOs and founders, making them feel respected and valued even as Apex took control of their companies. They were a perfect partnership. Daniel's brain, Marcus's charisma, vision and execution, strategy and performance, and the money was spectacular. By 2025, Daniel's personal net worth had reached $923 million. His 62% stake in Apex Capital, combined with his share of the carried interest from their funds, generated approximately $60–80 million per year in income, depending on deal flow and exit timing. He could have bought anything, could have lived anywhere, could have had the mansion in Greenwich, the penthouse in Tribeca, the vacation home in Aspen, the collection of luxury cars. But Daniel didn't want any of that. He'd grown up in Brooklyn, the son of Michael Cross, a medical device engineer who'd invented a revolutionary cardiac monitoring system in his garage workshop. Michael had sold his patent to a major healthcare company for $47 million when Daniel was 12 years old. And then Daniel had watched what happened next. The money had attracted people, lots of people. Women who suddenly found Michael fascinating. Business partners who had amazing investment opportunities. Friends from college who emerged from nowhere with their hands out. Everyone wanted a piece of Michael Cross and his $47 million. Michael had married 3 times after the money came. 3 different women, each one beautiful and charming and completely focused on the bank account. The first marriage lasted 18 months before she filed for divorce, walking away with $4 million. The second lasted 11 months, ending with a $3.2 million settlement. The third lasted barely 6 months, though she held on in the legal battle for almost 2 years, eventually extracting $5 million plus the house in Westchester. By the time Daniel graduated from high school, his father's $47 million was down to $31 million. By the time Daniel met Vanessa, Michael was living in a modest apartment in Queens, his fortune depleted to around $18 million after bad investments and gold-digging ex-wives had taken their toll. Everyone sees the money first, Michael had told Daniel over dinner one night, 3 years before he died of a stroke. Nobody sees you. They see what you can do for them, what you can buy them, how you can improve their lives. And you'll never know if someone loves you for who you are, or for what you have. That conversation had shaped everything Daniel did after founding Apex Capital. He'd kept his wealth secret. He'd lived modestly. He'd tested people by showing them the smallest version of himself, watching to see if they'd stay when there was nothing shiny to attract them. And then, in October 2014, at a venture capital conference in Austin, Texas, he'd met Vanessa Mitchell. She'd been 27 years old then. Junior associate at Sterling Advisory Group, working in their Dallas office, ambitious and brilliant and absolutely captivating. She'd been on a panel about emerging consulting trends in the technology sector. Daniel had been there as an anonymous attendee. Just another guy in khakis and a button-down shirt, taking notes, asking occasional questions. After the panel, during the cocktail hour, he'd approached her. "Your analysis of the consulting market was impressive," he'd said, "but you're missing the second-order effects of private equity consolidation. In 18 to 24 months, most mid-size consulting firms are going to face pressure to either scale dramatically or become acquisition targets. Sterling should be positioning now." Vanessa had looked at him with sharp interest. Not the polite dismissal that most panelists gave to random conference attendees. Real interest. "That's an interesting thesis," she'd said. "What makes you think the consolidation timeline is that compressed?" And Daniel had spent the next hour walking her through his analysis, not mentioning Apex Capital, not revealing that he'd personally been planning to acquire 3 mid-size consulting firms over the next 24 months. Just explaining the market dynamics, the regulatory pressures, the way capital flows were shifting. Vanessa had listened with fierce intelligence, asking probing questions, challenging his assumptions, clearly analyzing whether his thesis held water. By the end of that hour, Daniel was half in love with her. She was driven in a way that reminded him of himself. She was smart, not just book smart, but strategically intelligent, able to see several moves ahead. She was hungry, not content to coast, not willing to settle for mediocrity. And she hadn't looked at him and seen money. She'd looked at him and seen an interesting mind, someone worth talking to, someone who understood her world. They'd gone to dinner that night. Then breakfast the next morning. They'd spent the entire weekend together, talking about markets and strategy and ambition and what they both wanted from life. "I'm going to make managing director by the time I'm 35, Vanessa had told him on Sunday morning, over coffee at a diner near the conference hotel. "I don't care what it takes. I'm not settling for middle management. I'm not going to be one of those people who gets stuck at senior associate and spends 20 years wondering what could have been." "Why managing director?" Daniel had asked. "Because that's where the real money is," Vanessa had said, and her honesty had been refreshing. "Base salary of $600,000 plus, carry-on deals, equity in the firm. That's financial security. That's independence. That's never having to compromise because you can't afford to walk away." Daniel had understood that. The hunger, the drive, the refusal to accept limitation. He'd told her he was a freelance graphic designer and data visualization consultant. Which was technically true, He did consulting work for Apex Capital, creating pitch decks and analyzing data presentations. He just hadn't mentioned that he owned 62% of the company he was consulting for. They dated long distance for 8 months. Daniel flying to Dallas every other weekend, Vanessa coming to New York once a month. In June 2015, Vanessa had been offered a position at Sterling's New York office, a promotion to senior associate with a $145,000 salary. She'd taken it. They'd moved in together in a modest apartment in Astoria, Queens. $2,400 per month for a one-bedroom with decent natural light and a kitchen that was barely functional. They'd gotten married 8 months later, in February 2016, in a simple ceremony at City Hall. 30 people in attendance. Reception at a nice Italian restaurant in Brooklyn. Total cost around $4,000. Vanessa had worn a dress from Nordstrom that cost $600. Daniel had worn a suit he already owned. It had been perfect. And for 5 years, it had been genuinely good. Vanessa's career had progressed steadily. Senior associate to principal consultant to vice president. Her salary climbing from $145,000 to $220,000 to $340,000. She worked brutal hours, 60 to 70 per week minimum, often more during major projects. She traveled constantly, Chicago, San Francisco, London, Singapore, wherever Sterling's clients needed strategic guidance. And Daniel supported her through all of it. He worked from home, or appeared to work from home. Most of his Apex Capital responsibilities could be handled remotely. Video calls with Marcus to discuss acquisition targets. Analysis sessions where he'd review financial models and market data. Strategy meetings held in secure video conferences where the other participants never saw his face, only his screen shares and his voice. Vanessa never questioned it. Why would she? Daniel was a freelance consultant. Of course he worked from home. Of course his income was modest. Probably $60,000 to $70,000 a year, she assumed. Enough to contribute to rent and utilities, not enough to significantly change their lifestyle. They'd bought their first apartment together in 2018. A 2-bedroom in Tribeca, $1.2 million, which had felt like a huge stretch on Vanessa's $340,000 salary but was manageable with a 20% down payment, $240,000, which had come from Daniel's accounts but which Vanessa had assumed was mostly from a small inheritance he'd mentioned from his father. They'd talked about having kids someday. After Vanessa made managing director, she'd said. After she'd secured her position, proven herself, built a foundation that would survive a maternity leave. Daniel had been fine with waiting. He loved Vanessa. He loved watching her career flourish. He loved being the supportive partner who cheered her victories and helped her strategize through challenges. And he'd helped more than she knew. When Vanessa was interviewing for the VP position at Sterling in 2019, Daniel had Marcus make a call to Sterling's CEO. Just a casual mention that he'd heard excellent things about Vanessa Mitchell from his network, that she seemed like exactly the kind of rising talent Sterling should be investing in. Marcus's endorsement carried weight. Sterling's CEO had taken the call seriously. And when Vanessa's interview came around, she'd been on the shortlist before she'd even walked in the door. She'd gotten the job. $340,000 salary. She'd been ecstatic. And Daniel had celebrated with her, never mentioning that he'd opened the door. In 2021, when Vanessa was trying to break into Sterling's inner circle of senior VPs who might eventually make managing director, Daniel had arranged for her to meet Kenneth Rothstein at a charity gala. Kenneth was on Apex Capital's board, a legendary private equity investor who'd made his name in the 1990s. He was also on the advisory board of 3 major consulting firms, including Sterling. Daniel had introduced them casually. Kenneth, this is my wife Vanessa. She's doing fascinating work in strategic consulting at Sterling. Vanessa, Kenneth has forgotten more about private equity than most people will ever learn. They'd talked for 20 minutes. Kenneth had been impressed. Vanessa was genuinely brilliant at her job, and she'd been able to discuss deal structures and market dynamics with real sophistication. 2 months later, Kenneth had recommended Vanessa for a special project reporting directly to Sterling's executive team. That project had led to her promotion to senior vice president, which had led to her being considered for managing director when the position opened up in early 2023. Every door, every opportunity, every lucky break that had accelerated Vanessa's meteoric rise. Daniel had been there in the shadows, quietly opening doors, making connections, ensuring she got the chances she deserved. Because she did deserve them. Daniel never would have helped her if she hadn't been exceptionally talented. He didn't believe in false charity or unearned advancement. Vanessa was brilliant at her job, strategic, analytical, ruthless when needed, charismatic when it mattered. She just hadn't done it alone, even though she believed she had. For 8 years, their marriage had been strong. Different, maybe, Vanessa constantly traveling, Daniel working from home, their schedules often misaligned, but fundamentally solid. They'd talked every night when she was traveling. They'd had standing date nights on Wednesdays when she was in town. They'd taken vacations to modest destinations, Maine in the summer, Vermont in the winter, nothing extravagant because they were saving for the future. Daniel had been genuinely happy. He loved Vanessa. He loved their life. He loved being married to someone driven and ambitious and unwilling to settle. And then, in March 2021, Vanessa had been promoted to managing director. And everything changed. The promotion came through on a Tuesday morning in March 2021. Vanessa was in their Tribeca apartment, on a video call with Sterling's executive committee when they told her. Daniel was in his home office down the hall, supposedly working on a design project, actually reviewing acquisition targets for Apex's Q2 strategy. He heard her scream, a genuine, unrestrained shriek of joy, and he jumped up from his desk, alarmed, thinking something was wrong. But when he'd reached the living room, Vanessa was crying and laughing simultaneously, her hand over her mouth, staring at her laptop screen where Sterling's CEO was smiling at her through the video feed. "We're thrilled to have you joining the partner track, Vanessa," the CEO was saying. "You've earned this. Your work on the Meridian restructuring project was exceptional. You're exactly the kind of leader Sterling needs going forward." Managing director. The goal she'd been chasing for 6 years. Base salary of $680,000. Carried interest of 2 to 3% on her deals. Equity stake in the firm. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Daniel had been so proud of her in that moment. He'd waited until she'd ended the call, then swept her into a hug, spinning her around the apartment while she laughed. "I did it," she'd kept saying. "I actually did it." "You absolutely did," Daniel had told her, kissing her forehead. "You worked your ass off for this. You deserve every bit of it." And she had. That part was true. What Daniel didn't know, what he wouldn't discover for another 18 months, was that the promotion had changed something fundamental in Vanessa's perception of herself. And of him. At first, the changes were subtle. Small shifts that Daniel noticed but dismissed as temporary adjustments to her new role. The hours got longer. Managing directors were expected to be available 24/7, to jump on flights with 4 hours notice, to take calls from clients at midnight. Vanessa had always worked hard, but now she was working 85 to 90 hours per week minimum. Weekends disappeared. Vacations got canceled. Their Wednesday date nights became sporadic, then rare, then basically non-existent. "I'm sorry," she'd say, calling him at 9 p.m. from her office. "The Synthcore deal is imploding, and I need to fix it before the board meeting tomorrow. Can we reschedule?" And Daniel would say yes, of course, because he understood demanding careers. His own responsibilities at Apex required similar flexibility. But it wasn't just the hours. It was the way she talked to him that started to change. Little comments, small digs, phrases that seemed innocuous on their own but accumulated into a pattern. They'd be at dinner with her Sterling colleagues, other managing directors, senior VPs, all of them earning $500,000 plus annually. And someone would ask Daniel what he did. "He's a graphic designer," Vanessa would say before Daniel could answer. "Freelance. He does logos, website layouts, that kind of thing. Very creative work." The subtext was always there in her tone. Not important work. Not serious work. Not work that matters in our world of billion-dollar deals and corporate strategy. Or they'd be at a charity gala. The kind of event where tables cost $25,000 and the attendees were CEOs and hedge fund managers and private equity titans. Daniel would be talking with someone about market dynamics or strategic positioning, clearly holding his own in the conversation, demonstrating depth of knowledge that went well beyond what a freelance graphic designer should possess. And Vanessa would materialize at his elbow, smiling apologetically at whoever he was talking to. "I'm so sorry," she'd say, taking Daniel's arm. My husband gets excited about business topics even though it's not really his field. I hope he wasn't boring you. Even though it's not really his field. As if Daniel was a child who'd wandered into an adult conversation and needed to be gently redirected back to the kids' table. The first time it happened, Daniel had been too stunned to respond. By the time it happened the third time, he'd learned to just smile and let her steer him away. The digs got sharper as her career accelerated. "I'm exhausted," she'd say, coming home at 11 p.m. after another brutal day. "I had 3 client meetings, a board presentation, and I had to fire a senior analyst who wasn't performing. I don't think you understand how draining it is to operate at this level." Asterisk at this level, implying that Daniel's level, his supposed $60,000 minus $70,000 per year freelance work, wasn't draining. Wasn't serious. Wasn't real work compared to her high-stakes corporate drama. Or she'd be getting dressed for another charity event, this one for an arts foundation where tickets were $1,500 each. Daniel would offer to come with her. "Honestly, Daniel, I think I'll go solo tonight," she'd say, adjusting her $3,200 Oscar de la Renta dress in the mirror. "These events are mostly networking for me. You'd just be bored, and I'd feel guilty about leaving you standing alone while I work the room. Plus, some of the people there can be intimidating if you're not used to that world." If you're not used to that world. As if Daniel hadn't been navigating that world, running that world, for over a decade. By 2022, Vanessa stopped inviting him to work events almost entirely. The annual Sterling Gala? She went alone. The quarterly partner dinners? Solo. Client entertainment events? It's really just business, Daniel. You'd be bored out of your mind. And maybe that should have been Daniel's first warning sign. Maybe he should have sat her down right then and demanded to know what was happening to their marriage. But he'd told himself it was temporary. That she was adjusting to the pressure of being a managing director. That once she'd proven herself and felt secure in the role, things would return to normal. He'd been wrong. The real shift, the one that Daniel couldn't ignore, happened gradually over late 2022 and early 2023. Vanessa started talking about him differently. Not just to his face, but to other people when she thought he couldn't hear. They'd be at their apartment, Vanessa on the phone with one of her Sterling colleagues, a woman named Patricia Holloway who'd also recently made managing director. "Oh God, Patricia, I know exactly what you mean," Vanessa was saying, pacing the living room while Daniel was supposedly in his office but could hear every word through their thin walls. "The partners' retreat in Monaco last month? I felt so out of place bringing Daniel. Everyone else had spouses who were executives or entrepreneurs or at least working in impressive fields. And there I am with my husband, the graphic designer. I love him, but Jesus, the disconnect was painful. The disconnect was painful." Or she'd be having drinks with her friend Miranda Chen, her college roommate who now worked in venture capital, at a wine bar 3 blocks from their apartment. Daniel had stopped by to drop off Vanessa's laptop charger she'd forgotten at home. He'd walked in just in time to hear Vanessa say, "I don't know, Miranda. Sometimes I feel like I've outgrown him. Like, I'm operating in this world of billion-dollar deals and corporate strategy, and he's still doing the same freelance design work he was doing when we met. There's no ambition there, no drive to build something bigger." Daniel had frozen in the doorway. Vanessa's back was to him, she didn't know he was there. "Have you thought about marriage counseling?" Miranda had asked. "What's the point?" Vanessa had said. "You can't counsel someone into being more ambitious. Either they have that fire or they don't. And Daniel, he's content. He's happy making his $70,000 a year, working from home, living a small life. But I'm not content anymore. I want a partner who matches my energy. Someone who operates at my level. Someone who operates at my level." Daniel had left the laptop charger with the hostess and walked out before Vanessa saw him. That night, lying in bed next to his wife while she scrolled through work emails on her phone, Daniel had felt something cold settle in his chest. It wasn't anger yet. It was worse than anger. It was the realization that the woman he'd loved for 8 years, the woman he'd supported and encouraged and quietly helped at every turn, looked at him and saw less than. She saw a man with no ambition, no drive, no fire. She saw someone who'd been left behind while she soared to greater heights. She saw dead weight. But Daniel had stayed quiet that night, and the night after that, and through all the months that followed, as Vanessa's comments got sharper and her patience got thinner and her respect for him eroded completely. He'd stayed quiet because some part of him still hoped it was temporary. That she was just stressed. That underneath the corporate armor and the status obsession, the woman he'd married was still there. And then came the night in September 2023 that destroyed that hope permanently. The night Daniel came home early and overheard the conversation that changed everything. It was a Thursday evening in September 2023. Daniel had told Vanessa he had a late video conference with a client, which was technically true. He had a scheduled call with Marcus Webb and 3 other Apex Capital board members to discuss a potential acquisition of a medical devices company in Boston. The call had been scheduled for 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. But the CEO of the target company had a family emergency and had to reschedule at the last minute. Marcus had texted Daniel at 7:15 p.m. From Marcus Webb. Message. Thompson's father had a stroke. He needs to reschedule. Call cancelled. We'll regroup Monday. Asterisk. Daniel had already told Vanessa he'd be tied up all evening. She'd made plans accordingly, probably work, maybe drinks with colleagues, something that didn't include him. He'd considered texting her to let her know he was free after all. But some instinct, maybe just the accumulation of months of small slights and dismissive comments, made him decide to just go home without warning. He'd left his office at the Apex Capital headquarters in Midtown. He maintained a private office there, though Vanessa had no idea it existed, and driven back to their Tribeca apartment. He'd parked in their building's garage, taken the elevator up to the 14th floor, and let himself in quietly with his key. The apartment was dark except for the lights from their balcony. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Daniel could see Vanessa outside, sitting in one of their patio chairs, phone pressed to her ear, a glass of white wine on the small table beside her. She was laughing, the kind of genuine, unguarded laughter he hadn't heard from her in months. Daniel set his laptop bag down by the door silently. Something told him not to announce his presence yet. Something told him to listen. He moved through the darkened living room until he was standing near the balcony door, which was open just enough to let in the September evening breeze. And then he heard his wife's voice, crystal clear in the quiet apartment. "No, Diane, I'm serious. The moment my sterling equity vests after this Apex acquisition, I'm filing. I've already talked to the attorney." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Vanessa continued, taking a sip of wine. "I know it sounds cold, but Miranda, I've been thinking about this for months. Maybe over a year if I'm being honest. Daniel has been, God, how'd I even phrase this? He's been an anchor. Dead weight. And I can't do it anymore. An anchor. Dead weight." Daniel stood frozen in his own living room, listening to his wife describe him to her friend like he was a problem to be solved. "He's sweet, sure," Vanessa was saying. "He's kind and supportive and he never complains about my hours. But Jesus, Diane, I need more than sweet. I need a partner who matches my energy. Someone who understands what it means to operate at this level. Someone who's building something real, not just doing freelance design work from our apartment." There was a pause while Diane said something Daniel couldn't hear. "No, I haven't told him yet," Vanessa said. "Why would I? My sterling equity doesn't vest until 3 weeks after the Apex acquisition closes. That's February 2024. If I tell him now, it just makes the next few months miserable for both of us. Better to wait until the money's locked in, then have the conversation." Another pause. "Of course I've thought about the financial implications," Vanessa said, and there was an edge of irritation in her voice now. "I talked to Howard Chen, yeah, the divorce attorney who got Rebecca $11 million from her ex. He says because New York is an equitable distribution state, Daniel is technically entitled to a portion of marital assets. Which is infuriating because he's contributed basically nothing to our financial success. Basically nothing." Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "But Howard says we can argue that my career achievements were entirely my own effort," Vanessa continued. "Especially since Daniel's income has been so minimal. We can probably cap his payout at maybe $600,000, $700,000. It's annoying, but it's not like I'll miss it. My sterling equity alone is worth $3.1 million, and that's before you factor in my Apex compensation package going forward." She laughed again, not the warm laughter of shared joy. The calculated laughter of someone who's solved a problem. "Right? Exactly. I'll take the hit on the divorce settlement, move on with my life, and finally find someone who actually belongs in my world. Someone impressive. Someone I don't have to apologize for at corporate events. There was a longer pause. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, tilting her face up toward the night sky. Do I feel guilty? She repeated whatever Diane had asked. Honestly? No. I've outgrown him, Diane. That sounds harsh, but it's true. I'm making $680,000 a year plus millions in equity. I'm having dinner with CEOs and private equity titans. I'm restructuring billion-dollar companies. And I come home to a guy who gets excited about designing a new logo for some Brooklyn coffee shop and thinks 11 Madison Park is expensive for dinner. I deserve better. I deserve someone from my ecosystem. Someone who operates at my altitude. Another pause, then Vanessa's voice dropped lower, more confidential. You want to know the worst part? Sometimes I look at him at these corporate events, when I do drag him along, and he just looks so lost. Like a puppy that knows it doesn't belong but is trying so hard to fit in. It's honestly embarrassing. Richard Caldwell. No, not Richard. I mean Marcus Webb from Apex. He actually asked me once if Daniel had the intellectual curiosity to understand my work. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Yes, Daniel thought, still frozen in the darkness. He could imagine. He could imagine it very clearly. I just need to be patient for 4 more months, Vanessa said. The Apex deal closes in late January or early February. 3 weeks after that, my equity vests. Then I'll sit him down, explain that we've grown apart, offer him a generous settlement, well, generous by his standards anyway, and move on with my life. She took another sip of wine. Honestly, Diane, it'll probably be a relief for him too. He has to know on some level that I've left him behind. That I'm living in a different stratosphere now. Maybe I'm doing him a favor by setting him free to find someone more compatible with his lifestyle. The conversation continued for another few minutes. Vanessa talking about her upcoming projects at Sterling, her excitement about joining Apex Capital after the acquisition, her plans for the future that apparently didn't include the man she'd married 9 years ago. Daniel stood there and listened to all of it. Every word, every dismissive comment, every calculation about how to minimize his payout while maximizing her freedom to trade up. Finally, Vanessa ended the call. I should go. Early meeting tomorrow. Love you too, Diane. Thanks for listening. Bye. Daniel heard her stand up, the chair scraping against the balcony tiles. He moved quickly and silently back toward the apartment door, grabbing his laptop bag. By the time Vanessa came inside from the balcony, Daniel was just walking in from the hallway, as if he'd just arrived. Hey, he said, with what he hoped was convincing surprise. The client call got cancelled last minute. I figured I'd come home and maybe we could order in, watch something together? Vanessa looked at him with that expression he'd come to recognize, a mix of mild annoyance and resignation, the look of someone being presented with an obligation they didn't particularly want. I'm actually exhausted, she said, setting her empty wine glass on the kitchen counter. Maybe just order something for yourself? I'm going to take a bath and go to bed early. Of course, Daniel said. No problem. You want me to save you anything? No, I'm good. Thanks though. She kissed his cheek, a perfunctory gesture, executed without thought, and headed toward their bedroom. Daniel stood in the kitchen of their apartment, in the home they'd bought together, and felt something inside him go very cold and very clear. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a phase she'd grow out of once she felt secure in her role. This was who Vanessa had become. Or maybe this was who she'd always been, and success had just revealed it. She'd looked at him for 9 years and seen a partner. Then she'd gotten promoted, started making real money, entered a world of corporate titans and billion-dollar deals. And suddenly Daniel wasn't a partner anymore. He was an anchor, dead weight, an embarrassment, something to be discarded as soon as it was financially convenient. She was planning to divorce him, was already working with an attorney to minimize his payout, was counting down the months until her equity vested so she could execute her exit strategy. And she thought she was being clever about it, thought she had it all figured out, thought she could take $600,000 to $700,000 of what little she assumed he had while walking away with millions. Daniel walked slowly to the balcony, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Their apartment had a stunning view. Brooklyn Bridge to the south, One World Trade Center slightly to the southwest, the financial district spread out below them like a constellation of wealth and power. Vanessa had wanted this view, had insisted on this apartment even though it had stretched their budget. Had loved telling people they lived in Tribeca with views of the bridge. It had mattered to her. The address, the status, the ability to say casually at dinner parties, "Oh, we're in Tribeca," and watch people's eyes widen slightly with impressed recognition. Daniel pulled out his phone. It was 9:47 p.m. He made 3 decisions in the span of 30 seconds. Decision 1. He would let Vanessa proceed with her plan. He wouldn't reveal his wealth, wouldn't try to save a marriage she'd already killed. He would give her exactly what she wanted: freedom to pursue someone from her ecosystem, someone who operated at her altitude. Decision 2. He would personally ensure the Apex Capital acquisition of Sterling Advisory went through smoothly. Vanessa wanted that equity to vest? Perfect. Daniel would guarantee the deal closed. As the majority shareholder of Apex Capital, he had that power. Marcus didn't execute acquisitions without Daniel's approval. And Sterling was actually a solid acquisition target. Daniel had been analyzing them for months already. They had strong client relationships, decent margins, room for operational improvement. Acquiring them made strategic sense for Apex, even without the personal motivation. So yes, he'd make sure the deal happened. He'd make sure Vanessa got everything she thought she wanted. Decision 3. He would teach Vanessa Cross a lesson about underestimating people. Not through violence, not through cruelty, not through public humiliation, although God knew she deserved it after planning to humiliate him by divorcing him with her attorney's carefully calculated settlement offer. No, he would teach her through the same tools she'd used to build her career: cold, strategic business planning and perfect legal execution. Daniel scrolled through his contacts and found Elena Rodriguez's number. She was probably awake. Elena was famous for working until midnight most nights, billing 70+ hours per week while also somehow maintaining a social life that made everyone else at Apex feel inadequate. He pressed call. Elena answered on the second ring. "Daniel, everything okay? It's late for you to be calling. I need your help with something," Daniel said quietly, glancing back toward the apartment to make sure Vanessa's bathroom door was still closed. "Something confidential. Something that stays between us and doesn't go through normal Apex channels." "Okay." Elena's voice shifted to alert. "What are we talking about?" "I need you to structure a contract. A very specific contract with provisions that will protect me in a situation I'm about to describe. And I need you to be absolutely ruthless about it." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then, "This is about Vanessa, isn't it?" Daniel wasn't surprised she'd guessed. Elena was brilliant, and she knew Daniel better than almost anyone at Apex. They'd worked together closely for the past 4 years, ever since David Kellerman had introduced them. "Yes," Daniel said simply. "Tell me what you need." And Daniel told her everything. About the overheard conversation. About Vanessa's plan to divorce him once her Sterling equity vested. About the attorney, the calculated settlement offer, the timeline. About how Vanessa thought Daniel was worth essentially nothing, $60,000 to $70,000 per year. Maybe a total net worth of $200,000 to $300,000 if she was being generous in her estimates. About how she had no idea that the man she was planning to discard for $600,000 was actually worth $923 million and owned 62% of the company that was about to acquire her firm. Elena listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, there was a long silence. "Jesus Christ," Elena finally said. "She really has no idea?" "None. And you want to?" "I want her to lose everything she thinks she's gained by being patient and strategic," Daniel said, his voice completely calm. "I want her to file for divorce right on schedule, thinking she's executing her perfect plan. And I want her to discover that her perfect plan just cost her approximately $164 million. Another pause. Then Elena laughed, short, sharp, and without humor. "You want me to design a trap?" "I want you to design a lesson," Daniel corrected. "About what happens when you underestimate people. About what happens when you treat your partner like dead weight while secretly plotting to extract money from them. About what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." "I'm in," Elena said immediately. "Give me 48 hours to think through the structure. We'll need to be smart about this. Nothing that could look like deliberate harm or bad faith. Everything needs to be standard business practice that just happens to have very specific consequences for your wife." "Ex-wife," Daniel said. "After this, she'll be my ex-wife." "Fair enough. Let me start working on the contract language." We'll talk Monday. They'd hung up. Daniel had stood on the balcony for another 20 minutes, looking out at the city his wife loved so much, the city where she'd built her impressive career, the city where she thought she'd finally found her rightful place among the powerful and successful. And Daniel had felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even betrayal, really. Just clarity. Vanessa had made her choice. She'd looked at their marriage and decided it wasn't serving her anymore. She'd looked at Daniel and seen someone beneath her, someone who'd been left behind, someone who could be discarded with a $600,000 severance package and a clean conscience. She'd done the math and decided he wasn't worth keeping. So Daniel would let her discover what she'd actually discarded. He would let her learn what her ambition had cost her. And he would do it using the same cold calculation she'd used when planning her exit strategy. The next morning, Daniel had gone to work, to his private office at Apex Capital that Vanessa didn't know existed, and started building the plan that would take 18 months to execute perfectly. A plan that would culminate in a ballroom at the Four Seasons, with wine dripping down his jacket, and 180 people laughing at the foolish husband who couldn't hold a glass properly. A plan that would teach Vanessa Cross that success doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you are. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, if you've ever discovered that the person you loved saw you as less than, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, then you understand what Daniel felt in that moment. And if you're wondering how someone could plan revenge for 18 months while living with the person who betrayed them, while pretending everything was fine, while watching them prepare to discard you like you never mattered, well, you're about to find out exactly how cold-blooded strategic planning can become when executed by someone who's spent 17 years making billion-dollar decisions. Because what comes next isn't just revenge. It's a masterclass in consequences. Hit that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed, because what happens next is going to make the wine incident look like a minor inconvenience. Monday morning, September 18, 2023. Daniel met with Elena Rodriguez in her corner office at the law firm of Rodriguez & Partners, the firm Elena had founded 2 years ago after leaving a prestigious position at Cravath to build something of her own. The office was sleek and modern, with glass walls overlooking Madison Avenue, minimalist furniture, and shelves lined with legal texts and case law references. Elena was 39 years old, barely 5 feet tall, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She'd been David Kellerman's protégé before David died. David used to say that Elena was smarter than he'd ever been. She just hadn't had his advantages of an Ivy League pedigree and old money family connections. Elena had fought for everything she'd achieved. Full scholarship to Yale Law, top 5% of her class, federal clerkship. Then grinding her way up at white shoe firms where she'd had to be twice as good to get half the recognition. David had recognized her brilliance immediately. He'd mentored her, promoted her, and before he died, he'd introduced her to Daniel with one simple instruction. If anything ever happens to me, Elena's the only person I trust to protect Apex's legal interests. And yours. Now Elena sat across from Daniel in her office, a legal pad covered in notes in front of her, and a laptop open to a complex document that was already 47 pages long. I've been working on this all weekend, Elena said without preamble. And I think I have a structure that accomplishes everything you want while being completely defensible as standard business practice. She turned her laptop screen toward Daniel. I'm calling it the Kellerman provision, Elena said. Named after David, because he would have loved the elegance of this. It's an executive retention clause that goes into subsection 8.7b of the Sterling Acquisition Agreement. Daniel leaned forward, reading the dense legal language on the screen. In plain English, Elena continued, the provision states that any Sterling executive designated as a primary stakeholder in the acquisition, that's managing directors and senior VPs who hold equity in the firm, who initiates divorce proceedings within 30 months of the acquisition closing date will forfeit all equity conversion rights and performance bonuses tied to the transaction. 30 months, Daniel said. That takes us to May 2027, Elena confirmed. But here's the key. The forfeited assets don't just disappear. They revert to Apex Capital. So if Vanessa files for divorce before May 2027, she loses $11.7 million, and that money flows directly back to the company you own 62% of. Daniel sat back, processing. And this is legally enforceable? Completely. Executive retention clauses are standard in major acquisitions. Companies want to prevent their newly acquired talent from immediately jumping ship. What makes this one elegant is how targeted it is. The language is buried in complex legalese about commitment to organizational continuity and leadership stability incentives. Sterling's lawyers will read it, recognize it as similar to clauses they've seen in other deals, and sign off. But it specifically targets divorce? Not just divorce, Elena corrected. It targets any significant personal or professional transition that could reasonably be expected to impact executive focus and commitment during the critical integration period. That includes divorce, but also things like leaving to start a competing firm, taking another job, retiring early. It's broad enough to seem standard but specific enough to catch exactly what you wanted to catch. She pulled up another document on her screen. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I'll make sure Vanessa is specifically designated as a primary stakeholder in the acquisition agreement. That means the clause applies to her $3.1 million in equity conversion, her $2.4 million retention bonus, and her accelerated vesting schedule for future Apex equity worth approximately $6.2 million over 4 years. Total exposure of $11.7 million, Daniel said. Exactly. If she files for divorce before May 2027, which, according to what you overheard, she's planning to do in February 2024, she loses all of it. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, thinking through the implications. What if Sterling's lawyers question the clause? He asked. They won't, Elena said confidently. First, because it's not unusual. Second, because I'll structure the entire acquisition agreement, and I'm very good at making sure the important details get buried in the right places. Third, because Sterling is desperate for this deal to close. Marcus has been courting them for months, and they know Apex's offer is the best they're going to get. They're not going to blow up an $800 million transaction over a standard retention clause. She closed her laptop and looked at Daniel directly. But here's what you need to understand, Daniel. This provision only works if you're absolutely certain Vanessa is going to file for divorce. If she changes her mind, if she decides to stay married to you for whatever reason, the entire trap is meaningless. She's not going to change her mind, Daniel said quietly. You didn't hear her on the phone, Elena. She wasn't venting frustration or working through doubts. She was executing a plan she'd already committed to. She's just waiting for the money to vest. Okay, then we move forward. But there's a second component you need to consider. Elena pulled out another document from her briefcase. This one much thicker, easily 200 pages. This is the divorce filing package, she said. Complete financial disclosure of your assets, prepared according to New York state requirements. When you file for divorce, and you will be filing, not her, for reasons I'll explain, this document reveals your true net worth to Vanessa, her attorneys, and potentially the court. She flipped to a highlighted section. Page 73. This is the valuation of your 62% stake in Apex Capital. Current value: $923 million. Page 94. This is the appreciation of that stake during your marriage to Vanessa, from February 2016 to present. Total appreciation: $318 million. Daniel saw where this was going. Under New York equitable distribution law, Elena continued, Vanessa is entitled to a fair share of all marital assets. Your Apex ownership predates the marriage, so the $605 million you had when you got married is separate property. But the $318 million in appreciation during the marriage is marital property. And she's entitled to half, Daniel said. Approximately, yes. The actual calculation is more complex. Courts consider factors like each spouse's contribution to the marriage, their earning capacity, their financial needs. But as a ballpark figure, Vanessa could argue for somewhere between $120 to $160 million. Let's call it $164 million with her share of your apartment and other minor assets. Elena closed the document. So here's the beautiful irony of your plan. If Vanessa had just stayed married to you, if she'd been patient and kind and valued your partnership, she would eventually have been entitled to approximately $164 million in a divorce. That's the cost of underestimating you. She could have had that money. She just had to not treat you like garbage. But instead, Daniel said, following the logic, she's going to file for divorce in February 2024, thinking she's executing her perfect plan. She'll trigger the Kellerman provision and immediately lose $11.7 million. Then I'll file my financial disclosure, revealing I'm actually worth $923 million. And she'll realize that if she just waited, if she'd just been a decent partner, she could have had $164 million instead of losing nearly $12 million. Exactly, Elena said. The emotional devastation will be exquisite. She'll have lost everything she was trying to gain, all because she couldn't wait and couldn't value you properly. Daniel stood up, walking to the window, looking out at Madison Avenue below. Yellow cabs and black cars and pedestrians, all moving through their Monday morning routines, completely unaware that 20 floors above them, someone was designing one of the most calculated revenge plans in corporate history. There's one thing I don't understand, Daniel said, still looking out the window. You said I'll be filing for divorce, not her. Why? Because of the Kellerman provision language, Elena explained. It specifically penalizes executives who initiate divorce proceedings. If you file first, Vanessa doesn't trigger the forfeiture clause. She still gets her $11.7 million. Then what's the point? The point is control, Elena said. If you file first, you control the timeline and the disclosure. You file in, say, November 2024, 9 months after the Apex acquisition closes, 3 months before Vanessa was planning to file. You include the complete financial disclosure showing your true net worth. And suddenly Vanessa is in an impossible position. Elena walked over to stand beside Daniel at the window. She's faced with a choice, Elena continued. Accept a modest settlement. Let's say $1 minus $2 million, which is all you're legally required to offer as an initial proposal. Or fight for her full entitlement of $164 million. But if she fights, the entire truth comes out. That she was planning to divorce you while thinking you were worth nothing. That she'd already consulted with a divorce attorney about minimizing your payout. That she called you dead weight and an anchor. Her reputation gets destroyed, Daniel said, seeing it now. Completely. She's a managing director at Apex Capital. She's supposed to be brilliant at assessing value, reading people, making strategic judgments. How does it look if everyone finds out she was married to the majority owner of the firm for 10 years and never noticed? How does it look if her own words about you, dismissive, calculating, cruel, become public record? Daniel turned away from the window, looking at Elena. So I file first. I reveal my net worth. I offer her an insultingly low settlement. And she has to choose between taking the money she could have had if she'd been a decent partner, or fighting for it and exposing herself as someone who married a billionaire and treated him like he was worthless. Exactly. And here's the final twist. Because you're filing first, the Kellerman provision doesn't trigger. Vanessa doesn't lose her $11.7 million in sterling equity right away. She keeps it through the divorce process. But, Daniel prompted, knowing Elena well enough to hear the coming twist. But if Vanessa, after discovering your true net worth, decides she wants to stay married to you after all, if she suddenly has a change of heart and begs you to withdraw the divorce filing, you can refuse. And if she then files her own divorce proceedings out of frustration or anger, she triggers the Kellerman provision and loses everything anyway. The elegance of it was breathtaking. It's a trap with no escape, Daniel said softly. It's a lesson, Elena corrected. About consequences. About what happens when you underestimate people and treat them as expendable. About the cost of valuing money over character. She walked back to her desk and pulled out a contract. This is my engagement letter. I'll need a retainer of $100,000 to start. Over the next 18 months, my fees will probably run around $400,000 total. Maybe more if the divorce gets contentious, less if Vanessa takes the settlement. Daniel pulled out his checkbook, an actual physical checkbook, which he'd maintained specifically for expenses he didn't want traced through his usual Apex Capital accounts. He wrote a check for $100,000. One more thing, Daniel said as he handed Elena the check. I want you to structure the sterling acquisition personally. Marcus will handle the negotiations and public-facing work, but you're drafting the actual purchase agreement. You're positioning the Kellerman provision exactly where it needs to be. You're making sure every detail is airtight. Of course, Elena said. That's the only way this works. And Elena? Vanessa can never know that you and I had this conversation. As far as anyone knows, you're just Apex's general counsel doing standard acquisition work. Attorney-client privilege, Elena said. Plus common sense. I have absolutely no intention of broadcasting that I helped design this particular lesson. It would be bad for business and probably bad for my karma. She smiled slightly. Although, between you and me, I'm pretty sure David is watching from wherever he is, absolutely delighted that his name is going on the provision that's going to teach your wife not to underestimate people. Daniel thought of David Kellerman, his friend, his mentor, the man who'd taught him that the best revenge in business wasn't loud. It was buried in subsection 8.7b of legally binding contracts, invisible until it was too late. He would love this, Daniel agreed. Okay, Elena said, standing up to see Daniel out. Next steps. I'll finalize the Kellerman provision language this week. I'll coordinate with Marcus on positioning the Sterling acquisition as a priority target for Apex, which won't be hard since they actually are a good investment. I'll make sure the timeline works so that the acquisition closes in late January or early February 2024, with equity vesting approximately 3 weeks later. Which puts Vanessa right on schedule to file for divorce in February, Daniel said. Exactly. Except you'll file first, probably in November 2024, 9 months after the deal closes. You'll include the financial disclosure. You'll make your initial settlement offer. And then we watch Vanessa's world implode when she realizes what she's lost. Elena walked Daniel to her office door. One last question, Daniel. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Once we start down this path, once the Kellerman provision is in the Sterling acquisition agreement, there's no taking it back. This will end your marriage. It will devastate Vanessa. It will be brutal and public and permanent. Daniel thought about the conversation he'd overheard. Vanessa laughing about his lack of ambition. Calling him dead weight, planning to extract $600,000 from him while walking away with millions. Looking forward to finding someone more impressive, someone who operated at her level. I'm sure, he said. And over the next 18 months, Daniel executed the plan with surgical precision. 4 days after the signing ceremony at the Four Seasons, Daniel sat in his home office in their Tribeca apartment, watching through his computer monitor as Vanessa prepared for her first official meeting as a managing director of Apex Capital Group. She was in their bedroom down the hall, on a video call with her assistant, discussing the agenda for today's integration planning session at Apex's Midtown headquarters. Make sure the car service knows to pick me up at 9:30 sharp, Vanessa was saying, applying makeup while balancing her phone on the dresser. And confirm that Marcus Webb will be in the meeting. I want to establish a strong presence as we transition into the new organizational structure. Daniel smiled faintly. Marcus would indeed be in that meeting. So would Daniel, though Vanessa didn't know that yet. Today was the beginning of Phase 3. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Webb. From Marcus Webb. Message. Board meeting confirmed for 10 a.m. All directors present. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Asterisk. Daniel typed back. 2. Marcus Webb. Message. Completely certain. Time to stop being invisible. Asterisk. For 17 years, Daniel had been content to let Marcus be the face of Apex Capital while he operated from the shadows. But Vanessa's treatment of him had awakened something he hadn't felt in years. A need to be seen for who he actually was. Not to impress her, not anymore, but to make her understand the magnitude of her mistake. The integration meeting started at 10 a.m. Daniel arrived at Apex's offices at 9:45, using the private executive elevator that led directly to the secure boardroom on the 51st floor. He'd designed this space himself 5 years ago. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, a $78,000 custom conference table made from reclaimed walnut, original artwork worth approximately $410,000 collectively. Marcus was already there, along with 7 other Apex board members. These were people who managed billions, former Fortune 100 CEOs, legendary investors. They treated Daniel with the respect his position and intelligence commanded. She has absolutely no idea, asked Dr. Amara Okafor, former CEO of a $15 billion pharmaceutical conglomerate. None whatsoever, Daniel confirmed, adjusting his tie. Today he wasn't wearing clearance items from Kohl's. He wore a bespoke Tom Ford suit worth $7,400, John Lobb shoes worth $2,100, and an Audemars Piguet watch worth $94,000. A gift from Marcus 8 years ago when Apex hit its first billion. This is going to be brutal, said Kenneth Rothstein, Apex's CFO. Are you absolutely certain this is how you want to handle it? Daniel thought about the wine-stained blazer he'd carried home 4 days ago. Thought about Vanessa's laughter. The grown-ups need to finalize this transaction. I'm certain, he said. The Sterling executives began arriving at 9:55 a.m. Vanessa was among the first, wearing a burgundy Armani suit worth $8,100, carrying a Bottega Veneta bag worth $4,900. She looked confident, powerful, ready to impress. She entered the boardroom at exactly 10 a.m., followed by 6 other Sterling executives. Marcus Webb stood to greet them. "Welcome to Apex Capital," Marcus said. "We're thrilled to have the Sterling team officially joining our organization. Please, have a seat." Vanessa took a position near the head of the table, directly across from Marcus. She didn't glance at the other board members seated along the sides. She certainly didn't look at Daniel, who was seated 4 chairs to her right, reviewing a document. "Before we begin," Marcus continued, "I want to introduce someone who's been fundamental to Apex's success but who operates outside the public eye. Many of you may not be familiar with him, but he's the reason this acquisition happened. Daniel, would you like to say a few words?" Vanessa was taking notes on her tablet. She glanced up politely when Marcus said, "Daniel," probably expecting some mid-level analyst. Then she saw who Marcus was gesturing toward. Her husband, sitting at the board table, wearing a suit that cost more than she made in 2 weeks. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel if you haven't already, because the ending of this story will absolutely devastate you. Drop a comment below telling me what you think Vanessa's about to feel when she realizes the truth. The confusion on Vanessa's face was almost cinematic. She looked at Daniel, then at Marcus, then back at Daniel. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound emerged. "Good morning, everyone," Daniel said calmly, standing. "For those who don't know me, I'm Daniel Cross. I'm the founding partner and majority shareholder of Apex Capital Group, holding a 62% equity stake through a series of limited partnerships established in 2008. I've been involved in every major acquisition this firm has executed over the past 17 years, including the decision to acquire Sterling Advisory for $800 million. Vanessa's face drained of all color. Patricia Holloway, one of the other Sterling executives, whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Wait, I thought you were the graphic designer." "I do consulting work in data visualization," Daniel clarified, "which is design adjacent, but my primary role has been strategic oversight at Apex Capital since I founded the company with Marcus in 2008. He let that information settle. Watched Vanessa's mind trying to process what she was hearing. Watched the other Sterling executives exchange bewildered glances. "The reason I've remained a silent partner," Daniel continued, "is partly due to privacy preferences, partly due to regulatory considerations around certain investment structures, and partly because I prefer analytical work to publicity. Marcus has been an exceptional public-facing CEO, and our partnership has been extraordinarily successful." He pressed a button on the remote in his hand. The screen behind him lit up with a slide showing the Apex Capital ownership structure, including the specific trust arrangements that held Daniel's 62% stake. All legally documented, all verified by external auditors, all absolutely real. However, Daniel said, "I've decided it's time to be more visible in the company's operations, particularly as we integrate major acquisitions like Sterling. Going forward, I'll be taking a more active role in executive oversight." Vanessa found her voice. "Daniel, when were you planning to tell me you own the company I just joined?" "Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it?" Daniel said calmly. The room went completely silent. The other Apex board members watched with carefully neutral expressions. The Sterling executives looked like they'd stumbled into a family intervention. Daniel pulled out his phone and a new slide appeared on the screen. It was a calendar showing the next 30 months, marked in red. "According to the acquisition agreement that Sterling executives signed on November 20th, Daniel said, there's a retention provision in subsection 8.7b requiring executive commitment to organizational stability. Specifically, any primary stakeholder, that includes you, Vanessa, as well as Patricia Holloway and Robert Chen from your team, who initiates divorce proceedings within 30 months of the acquisition closing date will forfeit all equity conversion rights and performance bonuses tied to this transaction." He pulled up another slide showing specific dollar amounts. Vanessa's forfeiture would total $11.7 million if she divorced within the restricted period. "I'm not saying this to be cruel," Daniel continued, looking directly at his wife. I'm saying it because our integration planning needs to account for executive stability. And I want everyone to understand the contractual obligations they've agreed to. After all, you told 180 people at the Four Seasons that this was the biggest day of your career. The emphasis on those words made several board members shift uncomfortably. Daniel, can we talk privately? Vanessa managed. Of course, Daniel said smoothly. But let's finish this meeting first. We have significant integration details to cover, and I know you're eager about your new role here. Daniel spent the next 90 minutes walking through the integration strategy he'd personally designed. He was brilliant at this, knew every financial model, every market analysis, every competitive advantage Apex could leverage. The other board members contributed questions and suggestions, treating Daniel with obvious deference. Vanessa sat frozen, barely participating, while Patricia kept shooting her confused glances. The woman who'd been so confident 90 minutes ago had completely disappeared. Finally, at 11:30 a.m., Marcus called for a break. Let's reconvene at 1 p.m. Daniel, thank you for that comprehensive overview. The room cleared quickly. The Sterling executives clustered in the hallway, whispering urgently. Vanessa approached Daniel slowly, like approaching a tiger that might attack. Your office or mine? Daniel asked pleasantly. You have an office here? I have a private office on the 53rd floor. Come on. He led her to the elevator, inserted a special access card, and rode up in silence. The 53rd floor was executive territory, only 5 offices, all corner suites with spectacular views. Daniel's office was at the end of the hall, 900 square feet with custom built-in bookshelves, a sitting area with a $21,000 Italian leather sofa, and a desk made from zebrawood that had cost $27,000. Vanessa walked in like entering a dream or nightmare. Sit down, Daniel said, gesturing to chairs facing his desk. She sat. He remained standing, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. How long have you owned this company? Vanessa's voice was barely a whisper. 17 years. Since before we met. Why didn't you tell me? Daniel turned to face her. At first, I wanted to make sure you loved me for who I was, not what I had. My father went through 3 marriages to women who only wanted his money. I'd learned to be careful. But we've been married for 10 years. $923 million, Daniel said calmly. As of this morning's portfolio valuation. And yes, I thought about telling you many times. But then your career took off, and I realized something interesting. He sat down across from her, close enough to see tears forming in her eyes. I realized I liked being underestimated, he continued. I liked watching you navigate your corporate world. I liked supporting you behind the scenes. Do you know how you got your first interview at Sterling? Vanessa stared at him. I had Marcus make a call to the CEO. You were qualified, I never would have recommended you if you weren't. But that first door? I opened it. You. What? The mentorship from Kenneth Rothstein that accelerated your promotion? I suggested you to him at a charity event in 2021. The introduction to the venture capital firm that helped fund Sterling's Series D? I arranged that too. His voice was eerily calm. I was proud of you, Vanessa. I wanted to see you succeed. Tears were running down her face now. Then why are you doing this? Why humiliate me in front of the board? Daniel pulled out his phone and pressed play on a recording. Vanessa's voice filled the office. Asterisk, Daniel has been dead weight for years. He's sweet, sure, but God, I need a partner who matches my energy. Asterisk. Her face went from white to gray. I've been planning this for 18 months, Daniel said quietly. Ever since the night I came home early and heard you on the phone with your divorce attorney. Talking about how to minimize what I get in the settlement. About how I was embarrassing you. About how you deserve someone from your world. Daniel, I didn't. Did you know, he continued, that under New York equitable distribution law, you're entitled to half of assets acquired during our marriage? My Apex ownership predated our marriage, but the appreciation during our 10 years together, approximately $318 million, is marital property. Your fair share would be about $164 million, plus half of our apartment. Vanessa's mouth fell open. If you'd stayed married to me, if you'd been patient, you could have eventually divorced amicably and walked away with $164 million. Instead, you were planning to file 3 weeks from now, right after your equity vested. Except now that equity is tied to the retention clause. File for divorce before May 2027, and you lose $11.7 million. He stood, walked to the door, opened it. All because you couldn't wait. All because you were so eager to trade up to someone more impressive. I didn't know. Daniel, please. I was frustrated. I didn't mean. You meant every word, Daniel said. And that's fine. You're allowed to outgrow a marriage. But you're not allowed to treat me like I'm worthless while planning to take half of what little you thought I had. You're not allowed to humiliate me in front of 180 people and then play victim when I stop protecting you from consequences. He opened the door wider. The meeting resumes in 45 minutes. You should fix your makeup. Your new colleagues are already wondering why you didn't know your husband owned the company. What are you going to do? Fire me? Fire you? No. You're genuinely good at your job, and Apex doesn't waste talent over personal matters. Your position is secure as long as you perform. He paused. But I am going to file for divorce tonight. Elena Rodriguez has had the papers ready for 4 months. But the retention clause applies to executives who initiate divorce proceedings. I'm initiating them. You're not forfeiting anything yet. The relief on her face was almost insulting. However, Daniel continued, my filing will include complete financial disclosure of my assets as required by law. Every advisor and attorney will tell you that you're entitled to approximately $164 million. And you'll have to decide whether to fight for that money, knowing everyone will learn you were planning to divorce me while thinking I was worth nothing, or walk away with dignity. You're manipulating me. I'm giving you the same choice you were planning to give me, Daniel corrected. The difference is I'm being honest about it. You have 30 months to figure out what you value more. The money you would have gotten anyway if you'd been patient and kind, or your reputation. He checked his watch, the Audemars Piguet worth more than her car. 42 minutes until the meeting resumes. I suggest you compose yourself. Vanessa walked past him into the hallway. At the elevator, she turned back. Did you ever really love me? For the first time, Daniel's control slipped. His voice cracked slightly. I loved you more than anyone. I would have given you everything, not because you earned it, but because that's what you do for the person you build a life with. But you looked at me and saw dead weight. You heard, graphic designer, and decided I wasn't worth your time anymore. He met her eyes. So yes, I orchestrated this. I let you sign that agreement. I let you pour wine on me because I needed to know if there was any part of the woman I married left inside you. And you know what I see right now? I don't see remorse. I see you calculating whether you can still salvage the $164 million. The elevator doors opened. Vanessa stepped in. This isn't over, she said. Yes, Daniel replied quietly. It really is. The doors closed. The divorce papers were delivered to Vanessa on November 25, 2024, at 8:47 a.m. by a private process server who found her in the Apex Capital parking garage. Daniel had specifically chosen that moment, right before a major presentation she was giving to Apex's board about Sterling's Q4 performance projections. The papers included a complete financial disclosure that ran to 73 pages. Page 9 listed Daniel's 62% ownership stake in Apex Capital, valued at $923 million. Page 18 detailed the limited partnerships established before their marriage. Page 29 showed the appreciation during their 10 years together, $318 million, of which Vanessa was entitled to claim approximately half. Her theoretical settlement, $164 million, plus half of their $1.6 million apartment and other minor assets. Total potential payout, $164,800,000. The papers also included a proposed settlement agreement. Daniel was offering her exactly $1.1 million, half their apartment, half their vehicles, half their savings. He was claiming his Apex appreciation as separate property based on a technicality in the trust structure that Elena Rodriguez had spent $97,000 confirming. Vanessa would have to fight in court for the full $164 million. And Daniel's team of attorneys were prepared to make that fight as public and expensive as possible. The presentation Vanessa gave at 10 a.m. was, by all accounts, catastrophic. She stuttered through slides, mixed up revenue projections, forgot which quarter she was discussing. Marcus finally called a recess. Vanessa excused herself to the bathroom where she locked herself in a stall and cried for 20 minutes. Daniel watched the security feed from his office. He felt a brief flicker of something that might have been pity. Then he remembered the wine dripping down his pants. The laughter. The pity evaporated. Over the following 3 weeks, Vanessa consulted with 4 different divorce attorneys. They all told her the same thing. She had a strong case for claiming half of the $318 million appreciation. But the case could drag on for 3 years. Legal fees would exceed $2 million. And the entire time, every detail would be public record. Your husband is offering you $1.1 million to walk away quietly, her second attorney, Rebecca Lawson, told her on December 10. That's insulting given what you're entitled to. But you need to consider the optics. You're a senior executive at a company your husband owns. If this becomes a media circus, if details of how you planned to divorce him while underestimating his worth become public, your reputation will be destroyed. So I'm supposed to accept less than 1% of what I'm legally owed? No, you negotiate. Ask for $15 million, maybe $20 million. Frame it as a dignified settlement. He might agree just to avoid litigation hassle. Vanessa tried. Her attorney sent a counter-offer, $20 million in exchange for expedited divorce with mutual NDAs. Daniel's response came back within 24 hours, $1.1 million. Final offer. Take it or see you in court for the next 3 years, asterisk. By mid-December, Vanessa's life had become surreal. She was still working at Apex, still attending meetings where Daniel would occasionally appear to discuss strategic initiatives. He was always professional. Always polite, absolutely cold. It was somehow worse than if he'd been cruel. Her sterling colleagues had mostly figured out the situation. Whispers about the managing director who didn't know her husband owned the company had spread through every department. Patricia Holloway cornered her in the break room on December 18. Is it true? You really had no idea Daniel owned Apex? Vanessa had learned to keep her face neutral. We kept our professional and personal lives separate. Come on, Vanessa. You introduced him as a graphic designer making maybe $60,000. You poured wine on him at the signing ceremony. Everyone saw it. That was an accident. It wasn't, Patricia said, not unkindly. I was standing right there. You knocked his glass out of his hand and laughed. We all thought it was weird. Now we know the truth. You didn't respect him because you thought he was beneath you. Vanessa felt tears burning. He lied to me for 10 years about who he was. Did he? Or did you never bother to ask? Never wondered how a guy supposedly making $68,000 could give you advice that kept landing you promotions? Patricia shook her head. I've been in 3 meetings where Daniel walked through analysis that was honestly brilliant. That doesn't come from someone who's just a freelance designer. You had to have known he was smarter than you were giving him credit for. She walked away, leaving Vanessa alone with her coffee and her shame. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. I'm enjoying this story. And tell us what you would have done in Daniel's situation. The breaking point came on January 11, 2025, at an Apex Capital Board dinner at Per Se. It was an annual event for senior executives, with significant others invited. Daniel brought Dr. Amara Okafor, not as a date, but as his dinner companion, discussing a potential acquisition in renewable energy. Vanessa came alone. Her recent boyfriend, a partner at a competing firm, had ended things when the divorce became public. Too much baggage, he told her. And honestly, your judgment seems questionable. At dinner, Daniel gave a toast thanking everyone for their contributions to Apex's record year. The firm had increased assets by 27%, generating returns that had netted Daniel personally about $91 million in 2024. I also want to acknowledge a personal transition, Daniel said, raising his champagne. As many know, my wife Vanessa and I are divorcing. It's been difficult, but I'm grateful we've both handled it professionally. Vanessa remains an exceptional executive in our sterling integration, and I have complete confidence in her abilities. It was gracious, kind. It made Vanessa look petty by comparison when she couldn't muster a smile. After dinner, she found Daniel alone on the restaurant's terrace, looking out at Central Park lights. Why are you doing this? She asked. The public compliments, the professional respect. You're making me look worse by being nice. Daniel turned to face her. I'm being nice because it's the truth. You are excellent at your job. This divorce isn't about punishing you professionally. Then what is it about? Because offering me $1.1 million when I'm entitled to $164 million sure feels like punishment. It's about consequences, Daniel said quietly. You made choices, Vanessa. You chose to value money and status over character. You chose to plan a divorce while thinking I was worth nothing, strategizing about how to minimize what I get. You chose to humiliate me publicly because you thought I couldn't fight back. He finished his champagne. I'm offering you $1.1 million because that's what you would have gotten if you divorced me while still thinking I was a graphic designer. It's the settlement you planned to give me. Well, actually you were planning about $600,000, but I'm being generous. The $164 million? That's what you would have received if you'd been a partner. If you'd treated me with basic respect. If you'd valued our marriage for more than what you thought you could extract from it. So this is revenge. No, Daniel corrected. Revenge would be destroying your career, publicly humiliating you, making your life miserable. I'm not doing any of that. I'm simply letting you experience the natural consequences of your own values. You wanted to leave a man you thought was worth $68,000 and trade up. Fine, you can have that freedom. But you don't also get to claim the money you would have had if you'd stayed and been a loving partner. Vanessa's voice broke. I did love you. I lost myself in the ambition. I made mistakes. Yes, you did. Daniel's voice softened slightly. And I'm not saying I handled everything perfectly. Maybe I should have told you about my wealth years ago. Maybe keeping that secret was manipulation. But Vanessa, I heard you on the phone. I heard you call me dead weight. I watched you laugh when wine soaked my pants in front of 180 people. And in all these weeks since you found out who I really am, not once have you actually apologized for how you treated me. Every conversation has been about the money you're losing, not about the partner you discarded. He moved toward the door, then paused. Take the $1.1 million, Vanessa. Sign the settlement. Move on with your career. Find someone from your world who matches your energy. And maybe eventually you'll realize that the money you lost wasn't the real cost of your choices. He walked inside, leaving her alone on the terrace. On February 8, 2025, Vanessa signed the settlement agreement. She received $1.1 million, her Audi, and freedom from a marriage she'd already abandoned emotionally. The divorce was finalized on March 3 with minimal press coverage. Elena Rodriguez had ensured records were sealed. Vanessa continued at Apex for another 9 months. She was professional, competent, utterly miserable. Every meeting with Daniel reminded her of what she'd lost, not the money, though that stung, but the life she could have had. In November 2025, she accepted a position at a competitor firm in Boston. Salary: $810,000 plus carried interest. She moved into a luxury brownstone, started dating a successful entrepreneur, tried to convince herself she'd made the right choices. Daniel remained at Apex, though he did start appearing more publicly. Industry magazines profiled him. He spoke at conferences. Bloomberg featured him. The billionaire nobody knew. Daniel Cross's 17-year secret. The article briefly mentioned his divorce, noting they'd separated amicably. Vanessa's name wasn't mentioned. Daniel had ensured that he didn't date anyone for over a year. When he finally did, it was Sophie Chen, a public school teacher earning $67,000 annually, coordinating literacy programs in underserved communities. She had no idea who Daniel was when they met at a fundraiser for educational equity. She thought he was just another donor who cared about helping kids. On their fourth date, when she insisted on splitting the $58 Thai food bill, Daniel laughed harder than he had in years. What's funny? Sophie asked, smiling but confused. Nothing, Daniel said. You have no idea how refreshing it is to split a Thai food bill with someone. He told her about his wealth on their seventh date, sitting in his aging Toyota Camry, the same car he'd driven while married to Vanessa. Wait, you're that Daniel Cross? Sophie said, pulling up the Bloomberg article. The private equity guy worth $900 million? Currently $967 million, but who's counting? She'd paused. And you've been driving this 2016 Camry because it gets me where I need to go, and I'd rather spend money on things that matter. Like funding literacy programs. She'd absorbed this. Is this going to be weird now? Probably a little, Daniel admitted. Daniel, you're a guy who gets excited about analyzing market trends and who volunteers at a homeless shelter every Saturday. I liked you before I knew about the money. The money just means you can afford better Thai food next time. They were engaged 13 months later. The ring cost $52,000, but Sophie made him donate an equal amount to her literacy foundation. They married in a small ceremony in the Berkshires with 35 guests. Reception cost $23,000, because Sophie insisted anything more was wasteful. Daniel had never been happier. In April 2027, 2 years and 6 months after the divorce, Vanessa saw the wedding announcement in the New York Times. She was living in Boston, engaged to her entrepreneur boyfriend, planning a wedding that would cost $380,000 with 280 guests. She looked at the photo of Daniel and Sophie, taken on a hiking trail, both windblown and casual and genuinely joyful, and felt something crack inside her chest. She'd lost $164 million. But looking at that photo, she realized Daniel had been right. The money hadn't been the real cost. She'd lost the one person who'd loved her before the managing director title, before the $680,000 salary, before the ambitious climb. She'd lost the partner who'd opened doors without asking for credit, who'd celebrated her success even as she dismissed his worth, who'd been willing to give her everything until she proved she only wanted what she thought he couldn't provide. She'd gained wealth, status, a career she could be proud of. She'd achieved everything she thought she wanted, and she'd never felt more empty. Vanessa didn't attend Daniel's wedding. She did send a card, the only communication between them since the divorce. It said simply, "I'm sorry. Not for the money. For everything else. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be. Daniel received it on his honeymoon in New Zealand. He showed it to Sophie. "Are you going to respond?" Sophie asked. Daniel thought for a long moment. Thought about 10 years of marriage, 18 months of planning, 2 years of healing. Thought about wine-stained blazers and billion-dollar secrets and the price of underestimating people. "No," he said finally. "Some chapters don't need epilogues. They just need to end." He tore up the card and threw it in the recycling bin. Then he took his wife's hand, and they walked down to the beach to watch the sunset together, two people who valued each other more than any dollar amount could measure. Epilogue. The lesson. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's letting people face the consequences of their own actions while you move forward into a life they can't touch. Vanessa had learned that lesson the hard way. She'd valued wealth over worth, status over substance. And in doing so, she'd lost something that could never be bought back. Daniel had learned something too. That love without respect is worthless. That hiding who you are never works in the long run. And that the right person doesn't care whether you're worth $68,000 or $967 million. They care about who you are when nobody's watching, when there's nothing to gain, when love is the only currency that matters. As for the $164 million Vanessa could have had? Daniel donated most of it to scholarships for first-generation college students from low-income backgrounds. Kids like Sophie's students. Kids who were brilliant and ambitious and deserving of opportunities they couldn't afford. He named the scholarship fund after his father, who'd taught him that success doesn't change who you are, it reveals who you are. Vanessa's wealth and status exposed her willingness to value money over character, proving she'd discard a devoted partner for someone more impressive. Daniel learned that the right person values who you are, not what you're worth. The real cost of Vanessa's choices wasn't the $164 million she lost. It was the irreplaceable partner who'd loved and supported her unconditionally. Success doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you are. And sometimes, the most powerful lesson isn't taught through cruelty or vengeance. It's taught through letting people discover exactly what they traded away when they chose status over substance, ambition over love, and the illusion of power over the reality of partnership. Vanessa got everything she thought she wanted: the corner office, the impressive salary, the freedom to find someone who operated at her level. And in getting everything she wanted, she lost the one thing that actually mattered. Daniel got something better than revenge. He got peace. He got a partner who saw him for who he was. He got a life built on authenticity instead of deception, on mutual respect instead of conditional love. And in the end, that was worth more than $164 million. That was worth everything. If this story moved you, if it made you think about how you value the people in your life, if it reminded you that character matters more than status, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear this message. Because the greatest lessons aren't about winning or losing. They're about understanding what truly matters before it's too late. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next story.